The first sound anyone noticed was the metal. Not the footsteps, not the shuffle of papers, not even the low murmur that usually filled the room before court officially began. It was the sharp, unmistakable click of handcuffs moving with purpose. The sound cut through the space and turned heads before anyone realized they were staring. She entered between two officers, wrists bound in front of her, shoulders squared as if the restraints were nothing more than an inconvenience. Her pace was steady. Not slow, not defiant. Controlled. The kind of walk that suggested discipline learned over years, not minutes. She didn't scan the room for sympathy. She didn't avoid anyone's eyes either. She simply moved forward, eyes level, jaw set, breathing even. People watched her like they were trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't expected to see that morning. She didn't look like the version they had already formed in their heads. Her clothes were neat, professional, chosen carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing careless. A dark blazer, clean lines, no jewelry except a simple watch on her wrist that now rested awkwardly against cold steel. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place, the way someone wears it when loose ends aren't an option. There was no makeup trying to soften her face, no attempt to look harmless. She didn't need to. One of the officers leaned in as they guided her toward the defense table. His voice was low, but not low enough. "Just sit where I tell you." She did not respond. That silence bothered him more than resistance would have. She sat when instructed, the cuffs resting against the polished wood. The sound echoed again, softer this time, but somehow louder in its effect. A woman in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. A man crossed his arms. Someone whispered, then stopped when they realized others were listening. From the corner of the room, the prosecutor watched her closely. Not with curiosity. With calculation. His eyes moved from her face to the cuffs, then back again, as if measuring how much effort it would take to make the room see her the way he intended. She kept her gaze forward. The charge was minor. Everyone knew it. It had been explained in quick, dismissive tones while she was processed. Disorderly conduct. Failure to comply. Words that could stretch or shrink depending on who spoke them. Words that usually didn't come with this level of attention. But attention followed her anyway. An officer took his position behind her chair, closer than necessary. Another stood near the aisle, arms folded, watching the gallery instead of the defendant. It was a posture she recognized instantly. Containment. Control. Anticipation of trouble that hadn't happened. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Across from her, her attorney whispered something she barely heard. He sounded tense. Careful. She nodded once, not turning her head. They had already discussed what would happen. Or at least what should happen. The courtroom doors closed. The room rose as the judge entered. Everyone stood. She stood too, the cuffs lifting with her, chains pulling just enough to remind her they were there. She didn't grimace. Didn't adjust her stance to accommodate them. When she sat again, it was with the same deliberate calm. The judge looked tired. Not bored. Not annoyed. Just tired in the way of someone who had seen too many versions of the same story and assumed this would be another. The clerk read the case number. Her name followed. A few heads tilted slightly. The name didn't match expectations either. The prosecutor stood first. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth, practiced. "This case involves a civilian who refused repeated lawful instructions from federal officers and escalated a routine interaction into a public disturbance." Civilian. The word hung there, intentional. "She was asked to leave a restricted area and declined to do so," he continued. "When officers attempted to guide her out, she became confrontational." That word too. Her attorney rose halfway, then paused. He glanced at her. She lifted her hand slightly, palm down. "Not now." The judge looked over his glasses at her. "Ma'am, you're aware of the charges?" "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was calm. Clear. No tremor. No challenge. "And you understand your rights?" "Yes, Your Honor." Something flickered in the judge's expression. Interest, maybe? Or surprise? He glanced at the file again, then back at her. Before we proceed, he said, is there anything you wish to say on your own behalf? The room waited. This was the moment people expected something. An explanation. An outburst. An emotional appeal. Even defiance would have fit the story they were quietly building. She met the judge's eyes and shook her head once. No, Your Honor. The silence that followed felt heavier than any speech. The prosecutor shifted his weight, clearly displeased. Silence didn't give him anything to work with. No soundbite. No reaction. No crack. From the gallery, a whisper slipped out anyway. She thinks she's better than this. Another voice murmured. Look at her. So calm. The officer behind her leaned forward slightly, as if expecting her to respond. She didn't. The judge glanced toward the clerk, then back to the bench. He was about to speak when the bailiff approached and leaned in, whispering something that caused the judge's brows to draw together. The judge straightened. We will pause briefly, he said. There's been a request for a delay. The prosecutor frowned. From the defense? No, the judge replied. From outside this courtroom. A low murmur rippled through the room. Delays were rare. Unexpected ones even more so. The prosecutor sat back slowly, eyes narrowing. He glanced at her attorney, then at her. This should be interesting, he muttered, not bothering to hide it. She remained still, but something inside her shifted. She recognized this feeling too. The pause before impact. The moment when plans changed without warning. The kind of quiet that came right before everything went wrong, or right. The judge tapped his pen once against the bench. We'll wait. Minutes passed. The gallery whispered again, speculation filling the space where certainty had been. Someone checked their phone before being sharply corrected. The officer behind her adjusted his stance, growing impatient. Her attorney leaned closer. Do you know what this is about? He whispered. She shook her head once. No. But her eyes lifted slightly, drawn to the doors at the back of the courtroom. She didn't know who was coming. She only knew that someone had intervened. And that whatever walked through those doors next was about to change everything. The waiting stretched longer than anyone expected. At first, the room held its breath, curiosity buzzing under the surface. Then impatience crept in. Chairs shifted. Throats cleared. The quiet turned restless, and in that restlessness, judgment grew louder. The prosecutor was the first to break the silence. He stood again, smoothing his jacket as if the delay had offended him personally. Your Honor, he said, measured but sharp. With respect, my office was not informed of any intervention that would justify postponing a straightforward case. The judge didn't answer immediately. He glanced once more at the doors, then back at the prosecutor. You've been informed now. That was all he said. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. He turned slightly, just enough to let his voice carry without officially addressing her. Some people mistake silence for strength, he remarked. Others use it to avoid accountability. A few quiet chuckles came from the gallery. She felt them more than she heard them. Her attorney shifted, clearly uncomfortable. My client has chosen not to make a statement at this time, he said. That's her right. Of course, the prosecutor replied, smiling thinly. But rights don't erase behavior. He began pacing slowly, each step deliberate. Federal officers testified that she refused to comply. That she questioned their authority. That she escalated a situation that could have ended in minutes. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her for the first time. She wants us to believe she's a victim, he said. But the evidence suggests otherwise. She met his gaze without blinking. The officer behind her shifted again, closer now. His presence pressed into her peripheral vision, deliberate, invasive. She could feel the weight of his attention on the back of her neck, like he was waiting for a mistake. A flinch. Anything he could justify. From the gallery, someone whispered, Why doesn't she just explain herself? Another voice answered, People like that never do. Her fingers curled once, slowly, then relaxed. A controlled movement. Barely noticeable. The judge leaned forward. Counsel, we are waiting on. With respect, Your Honor, the prosecutor interrupted. Delays like this send the wrong message. The judge's eyes hardened. Be careful what messages you assume. The prosecutor sat back down, but his expression said the point had been made. The bailiff walked toward the doors, checked the hallway, then returned to his post. He avoided looking at her. Time continued to crawl. The whispers grew bolder. She doesn't even look sorry. She thinks she's above it. She probably pulled rank. That one made her jaw tighten again, just briefly. Pulled rank. If they only knew. Her attorney leaned in close, lowering his voice. They're trying to provoke you. I know, she whispered back. Whatever this delay is, he added, it's unusual. She nodded slightly. Unusual isn't always bad. Across the aisle, the prosecutor whispered to one of the officers. The officer nodded, then glanced at her with a look that wasn't quite anger, not quite satisfaction. More like expectation. As if this was going exactly the way he thought it would. The judge checked his watch. Then, finally, footsteps echoed from beyond the doors. The sound was different from before. Slower. Heavier. Purposeful. The murmurs faded into silence almost instantly, as if the room sensed something before it saw it. The doors opened. At first, only a silhouette appeared against the hallway light. Broad shoulders. Straight posture. A presence that didn't rush or hesitate. Then the uniform came into view. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Someone sucked in a sharp breath. Chairs scraped as people instinctively stood before realizing no one had instructed them to. The man walked forward with measured steps, his dress uniform immaculate, the weight of authority stitched into every line. Silver stars caught the light on his shoulders. Not one. Not two. 4. The judge stood immediately. The prosecutor froze halfway out of his seat. The officers straightened, reflex kicking in too late to hide their surprise. The man didn't acknowledge any of them at first. His eyes went straight to her. For the first time since she had entered the room, something shifted in her expression. Not relief. Not pride. Recognition. He stopped several feet from the bench, heels clicking together in a crisp halt. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears. I apologize for the interruption, he said calmly. His voice was firm, steady, practiced by years of command. But this matter required immediate attention. The judge cleared his throat. General, we were not informed. I take responsibility for that, the man replied. This situation developed faster than it should have. The prosecutor finally found his voice. Your Honor, with respect, I don't see how military involvement. The general turned his head slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor stopped speaking mid-sentence. The general faced the bench again. The defendant should not be seated. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge hesitated only a moment. Ma'am, please stand. She rose smoothly, the chains lifting again, metal glinting under the lights. The general's gaze dropped to the cuffs. Something hard passed through his eyes. He turned back to the judge. This woman was not disorderly. She was not non-compliant. And she was certainly not acting as a civilian who didn't understand authority. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Sit down, the judge said sharply. The prosecutor sat. The general took one step forward. She was at a federal facility for an authorized briefing. The credentials were valid. The clearance was confirmed. The system error was not hers. He paused, letting that sink in. When she asked for clarification, he continued, she was detained. The gallery buzzed now, confusion overtaking confidence. The officer who had stood behind her shifted uncomfortably. The general's voice remained calm. She followed procedure. She remained composed. She did exactly what she has been trained to do under pressure. The judge looked at the file again, then up at her. Is this accurate? Yes, Your Honor, she replied. The prosecutor leaned forward again, desperate now. Even if that's true, General, that doesn't excuse the confrontation. There was no confrontation, the general said. He turned slightly, finally addressing the room. She has been trained to de-escalate hostile environments, to hold her ground without raising her voice, to remain silent when speaking would only make things worse. His eyes swept over the gallery, lingering on the faces that had whispered. Silence, he said evenly, is not guilt. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the walls had drawn in. The general looked back at her. And she has remained silent long enough. The judge swallowed. General, who exactly is the defendant? The general didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a folded document, and placed it on the bench. Then he spoke. She is one of mine. And in that moment, every assumption in the room began to crack. The document rested on the bench like a weight no one wanted to touch. The judge stared at it for a long moment before opening it, his fingers slower now, more careful. As his eyes moved across the page, something changed in his expression. The tired neutrality faded, replaced by focus, then disbelief. He looked up at her again, really looked this time, as if trying to reconcile the quiet woman in restraints with the words in front of him. The prosecutor sensed the shift and stood abruptly. Your Honor, he said, voice tight. Even if she has military affiliation, this court. The general raised one hand. Not high. Not dramatic. Just enough. The prosecutor stopped speaking instantly. This court absolutely has jurisdiction, the general said calmly. But jurisdiction does not excuse ignorance. He turned slightly, angling his body so the room could see him clearly. His presence filled the space without effort. Years of command had taught him that authority didn't need volume. She was not merely affiliated, he continued. She was assigned. On orders. The gallery buzzed again, louder this time. Whispers overlapped. People leaned forward, trying to see her differently now, as if her face might suddenly reveal something they had missed. The judge cleared his throat. General, he said carefully. For the record. For the record, the general replied. She has served this country in capacities that cannot be entered into this record. That stopped everything. The judge's pen hovered over the page, then slowly lowered. The prosecutor's confidence visibly drained. Your Honor, classified service does not place someone above the law. No, the general agreed. But it does demand respect for process. He turned his gaze toward the officers near the aisle. When credentials are presented, they are verified. When discrepancies appear, they are resolved. You do not detain first and ask questions later. One of the officers swallowed hard. The general continued. She asked for clarification. She was denied. She requested a supervisor. She was refused. She remained calm. He glanced at her hands again. She was handcuffed anyway. A hush fell over the room. The judge looked down at the cuffs, then back at the general. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor, she said quietly. Her voice carried farther than expected. The prosecutor tried one last angle. Even if procedure wasn't followed perfectly, there were witnesses who claimed. Witnesses who assumed. The general cut in. Witnesses who interpreted calm as defiance. He turned toward the gallery now, his eyes sharp but controlled. How many of you believed she was arrogant because she didn't beg? No one answered. How many of you believed she was guilty because she didn't cry? The silence grew heavier. She didn't raise her voice, he said. She didn't resist. She didn't insult anyone. She stood her ground and waited for the system to work. He paused. And the system failed her. The judge exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. General, he said, this is highly unusual. So is detaining one of our most decorated specialists over a database error. The general replied. That word, decorated, hit the room like a dropped glass. The prosecutor looked at her now with something close to disbelief. Decorated? he repeated. The general nodded once. Multiple commendations. Joint operations. Lives saved under conditions most people here will never experience. He turned back to her, his voice softening just slightly. She never once used her service to avoid accountability. Her jaw tightened again, but this time from something closer to emotion. The judge leaned forward. Ma'am, he said, why didn't you explain this earlier? She met his eyes steadily. Because it wasn't relevant until it was ignored. A ripple moved through the gallery. She continued calm but firm. I followed protocol. When it failed, I waited for it to correct itself. And when it didn't? The judge asked. I waited longer, she said. The judge sat back, visibly affected. The general took a step closer to the bench. There is more, he said. The briefing she was attending involved coordination between civilian and military agencies. The prosecutor stiffened. Is this court being asked to review? No, the general replied. This court is being asked to recognize that this case should never have existed. He placed another document on the bench. That is confirmation of her assignment. Redacted where necessary. Verified by my office. The judge scanned it quickly, then nodded once. The room was utterly silent now. No whispers. No movement. Even breathing seemed restrained. The judge looked up at her. Ma'am, I owe you an apology for allowing this to proceed without proper context. She nodded slightly. I understand, Your Honor. The general turned toward the officers again. This is not about blame, he said evenly. It is about learning. He gestured toward her. She operates in environments where one wrong assumption gets people killed. She knows the cost of restraint. His voice hardened just a fraction. Do you? The officer closest to her lowered his gaze. The general turned back to the judge. I formally request immediate dismissal of all charges. The judge didn't hesitate. Granted. A collective exhale swept the room. The prosecutor sank back into his chair, defeated. The judge continued. Furthermore, I will be requesting a review of the procedures followed in this detention. The general nodded. That would be appropriate. The judge turned to her again. Ma'am, you are free to go. The bailiff stepped forward, hands reaching for the cuffs. For the first time since this began, she flinched, just barely. Not from fear. From release. The metal clicked open, falling away from her wrists. Red marks bloomed where the cuffs had been, stark against her skin. She rolled her shoulders once, a small movement, almost instinctive. The general watched her carefully. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped back, straightened, and raised his hand in a crisp, unmistakable salute. The room froze. She looked at him, surprised now, genuinely. He held the salute, eyes steady. Slowly, deliberately, she returned it. The motion was precise. Perfect. Muscle memory shaped by years. The gallery watched in stunned silence. The general lowered his hand. You were right to remain silent, he said quietly. You trusted the process even when it failed you. She met his gaze. I trusted that someone would correct it. He nodded once. They almost didn't. The judge cleared his throat, voice thick. Court is adjourned. No one moved right away. As she turned to leave, the weight of the room shifted again, not judgment this time, but understanding. Faces that had once looked down on her now followed her with something closer to respect. She paused at the aisle, just briefly, and looked back. Not at the prosecutor. Not at the officers. At the people who had whispered. Silence isn't weakness, she said calmly. It's control. Then she walked away, leaving behind a courtroom that would never forget the moment it learned the difference. The room stayed frozen for several seconds after the judge declared the proceedings over. No one rushed to stand. No one reached for their phones. The air felt different now, heavier, as if the courtroom itself needed time to catch up with what had just happened. The bailiff stepped back from her, uncertain, suddenly aware that the authority he had leaned on moments ago no longer belonged to him in the same way. She stood quietly, wrist free, red impressions from the cuffs still visible against her skin. She didn't rub them. Didn't hide them. They were part of the moment, evidence of something that had gone wrong and then, finally, been corrected. The general turned toward her again. His posture softened, just slightly. Not enough for anyone to miss the rank he carried, but enough to show that this was no longer about command. "I should have arrived sooner," he said. She shook her head once. "You arrived when you could. That's not always good enough," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "It was today." He nodded, accepting that answer the way he accepted battlefield truths, without argument. Behind them, the judge rose from the bench, his voice careful now, measured in a way it hadn't been earlier. "Before everyone leaves," he said, "there is something that needs to be said." The room stilled again. "This court exists to protect rights," the judge continued. "Not assumptions. Not appearances. Today, that line was nearly crossed." His gaze moved toward the officers. "Authority is not proven by force. It is proven by restraint." The words landed hard. The prosecutor remained seated, staring down at his desk. The confidence that had fueled his voice earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter. Reflection, perhaps. Or regret. The judge looked at her once more. "You were entitled to dignity from the start." She nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." Those two words carried no bitterness. No satisfaction. Just closure. The general turned toward the officers again. "I will be requesting a full review," he said calmly. "Not for punishment. For correction." One of the officers shifted, then straightened. "Understood, sir." "Sir." The word came late, but it came. The general faced her again. "You don't owe anyone here an explanation," he said. "But you deserve something." She waited. "An apology," he said. Not quietly. Not privately. He turned so the entire room could hear him. "On behalf of the institution that trained you," he said, voice steady, "and the system that failed to recognize you today, I apologize." A ripple moved through the courtroom. "For the delay. For the assumptions. For the weight placed on you without cause." He paused, then added, "And for the fact that you carried it alone." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was respectful. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. "Apology accepted," she said. Not because she needed to say it. Because it mattered that she did. The general inclined his head once, then stepped aside, clearing her path toward the exit. A small gesture, but deliberate. Symbolic. The room noticed. She began to walk. This time, there were no whispers. No stares filled with judgment or curiosity. People watched her go with a different expression now. Some with awe. Some with discomfort. Some with the quiet realization that they had been wrong. As she passed the defense table, her attorney stood. "I'm glad you spoke when you did," he said softly. She paused. "I spoke when it mattered." He nodded, understanding more than he had earlier. At the aisle, she slowed, just for a moment, and turned back toward the bench. "If I may," she said. The judge met her gaze. "Go ahead. Today didn't end the way it began," she said calmly. "That matters. But what happens next matters more." The judge nodded. "It will be addressed." She accepted that and turned again, walking toward the doors. They opened before she reached them. Outside, the light felt brighter than it had that morning. Not because the sun had changed, but because the weight she'd carried inside was finally gone. She stepped through, the doors closing softly behind her. The general followed a few steps later. They stood side by side in the hallway for a moment, either speaking. The sounds of the courthouse moved around them, footsteps, voices, life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But something had. "You handled it exactly right," he said finally. She gave a small nod. "I handled it the way I was trained." He glanced at her wrists again. "Marks will fade." "Yes," she said. But memory won't. He looked at her then, really looked. That memory will change people. Only if they let it, she replied. They walked together toward the exit, then stopped. He extended his hand, not as a superior, not as a general, but as someone acknowledging another's strength. She took it. His grip was firm. Respectful. When they released, he stepped back. You're dismissed, he said, a hint of warmth in his voice. She allowed herself the faintest smile. Already was. She turned and walked away alone this time, shoulders relaxed, stride unburdened. The doors opened for her once more, and she stepped out into the world beyond the courtroom. Behind her, inside those walls, people would talk about what they had witnessed. They would debate it, replay it, justify their reactions or question them. Some would learn. Some wouldn't. But one thing was certain. They would never forget the woman who stood in handcuffs and chose dignity over defense. And the day authority had to apologize to restraint,